If you are a longtime NASCAR DFS player, you know why we are excited for this weekend for the GEICO 500 in Talladega. That is because we have a very specific strategy that works for us in NASCAR DFS on these pack tracks, and that is loading up on drivers starting further back who can get us place differential and exploit all the randomness and the crashes at tracks like this. The question we have for this week is, can we still do that when the starting order is set by an algorithm versus other methods? We're going to dive into the data there, look at what it says based on last year's races, and go tier by tier and break down our favorite plays for this week over on FanDuel. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to preview the GEICO 500 from a NASCAR DFS perspective and get you set for Sunday's race with lock at 2 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. We're going to talk about everything you need to know about this track, about this race, way you want to play things, some other strategies, some caveats to the strategy as well to get you set for this race. But also a quick reminder, no matter what you're playing for this week over on FanDuel, you have a podcast for it in the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Austin Swain broke down UFC 261 for DFS. That is already posted. He gave his thoughts on the 3 title fights, how to play them for DFS, and more. Tom Vecchio has you covered for the NBA and NHL slates, and I have MLB already posted for the solo shot for Friday's slate as well. So if you are watching right now, go to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and make sure you are subscribed there. If you win some money playing DFS based on our recommendations, make sure you leave us a rating and review as well. For this week, FanDuel is breaking out the big money for the DFS contest in Talladega. Their Intimidator contest is just $7.77 to enter. For that, you get a shot at $150,000 in total prizes, with $30,000 going to first place. 23% of the field will get paid, so get in on the action. And this week's contest, head to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Fantasy app. Eligibility restrictions apply. Welcome, Devontae, watching over on FanDuel. Track breakdown here for Talladega. For this week, we know we want to stack the back in Talladega. It's a tried and true strategy for NASCAR DFS. Because of all the wrecks, because of the variance, the drivers starting further back have both the best floor and the best upside for this race. We just have to dig in to see if that's still true for this week, with the field being set by an algorithm and the best drivers, the cream of the crop for NASCAR starting up front. Luckily, we have data to go off of here. We have 2 races last year, and they give us a good idea of how to play things for this week. Last year's fall race used the same algorithm in place to set the starting order. The only difference there is that the playoff drivers were locked into the top couple of spots. In that one, Denny Hamlin won the race, and he was in the perfect lineup. He started that race on the pole. The other drivers in that perfect lineup started between 16th and 30th. We saw something pretty similar in the spring. It was a different method for setting the starting order. It was a draw based on where drivers were and the owner points. But the broad point remained where the fastest cars were up front. In that one, Ryan Blaney won. He started 12th and was in the perfect lineup. The other 4 drivers in the perfect lineup all started between 15th and 21st. They were not super far in the back, but they were in position to get place differential points. And I think that we have 2 key takeaways from the perfect lineups in those 2 races. The first one is that our core needs to be in the middle of the pack and lower. Those cars are not total duds from a speed perspective, but they're also not starting right at the front. They can get some place differential points. For this race specifically, I think the drivers starting between 17th and 29th are almost all pretty fun. That's where my core will be, outside of one driver all the way in the back. We'll talk through in the tier-by-tier breakdown. The other takeaway from those perfect lineups is that the assumption game is fully in play. And longtime listeners know what that means, but if you're a new listener, here's what the assumption game is. For each tournament lineup, we pick a driver we think will win this race. We plug that driver into our lineup because that driver, if they get the 43 points for a win, like Hamlin showed last year, they are probably going to be inside the perfect lineup. So that's a good thing. But we want the other 4 drivers getting us place differential, because only one guy's going to get those 43 points for a win, and we want to get that guy on our team. But if we don't have those 43 points available to the rest of our lineup, we need to make sure we're getting upside via place differential instead. So it does make sense to take some swipes in tournaments. In cash games, you do want to drift further back. And here's the math reason behind that. Because Joey Logano has the best win odds in my simulations. He is at 12% in the sims. You don't want to go too hard at those guys. Like the odds that Joey Logano is in the perfect lineup, probably about 12% based on the simulations. Basically, those drivers up front need a win to pay off and to be in the perfect lineup. So you don't want to go too hard at those guys, but you can filter through them if you want to use them in tournaments. You just don't want you want to load up on those place differential drivers for cash games, and they need to be your core for tournaments as well. When you do decide to use someone up front as your assumed winner, you should consider correlated drivers for the other 4 slots. And by correlated drivers, I mean drivers who drive for the same manufacturer or drive for the same team or an affiliated team. So, for example, when Denny Hamlin does well, it increases the odds that Bubba Wallace will do well because they're both Toyotas. Hamlin is a co-owner on Bubba Wallace's team, and that's key for a lot of lineups. But it does matter more when you're using an assumed winner. They likely had help in getting that win. Like, we could have had the Penske stack of Logano, Keselowski, Austin Cindric during the Daytona 500. They wrecked on the last lap. It didn't work. I was very sad about that. We could have had that, though. So there are some pairings that make sense. Hamlin and Wallace is a big one, or Kyle Busch and Bubba Wallace for the Toyotas. Joey Logano or Brad Keselowski and Ryan Blaney paired with Matt DiBenedetto in 13th. I think the Stewart-Haas racing cars are interesting. You could go Eric Almirola and Kevin Harvick together, but then also Cole Custer and Chase Briscoe starting deeper in the pack. Just kind of think through teammates, think through aligned manufacturers, and consider stacking within your lineups for tournaments. Finally, you're going to have to be comfortable leaving salary on the table. And I don't mean like $100. I mean like $10,000 for this week. FanDuel did a good job of increasing salaries on guys starting further back. Just not sure it went far enough. So I mentioned before how much I love the drivers starting from 20th to 29th. None of the drivers in that range has a salary higher than $9,500, but I could see myself using 5 drivers from that range in cash. So I will have lineups where nobody in my lineup is above the average salary to fill your salary cap of $10,000. That's fine. I think it's actually optimal. It also makes you less likely to have duplicated lineups to other entries. So mentally prepare yourself beforehand. You need to leave salary on the table in order to fill out a good lineup. So I don't know if I'll have a single lineup this week that uses even like less than 1,000, or that leaves less than 1,000 on the table, because like that's the way things set up for this week. So just mentally prepare yourself to leave a whole lot of salary on the table, because if you don't, you're probably going to be filling out a pretty bad lineup based on the way the starting order was set for this race. So to recap here, strategy for this race, you do still want to aim for place differential, despite the fact the best, quote unquote, best drivers are starting up front. You just want to get it mostly from the middle of the pack and lower. Again, 17th to 29th is like the bread and butter for this week. One guy a bit deeper we can go at too. You can go up front with an assumed winner. You just need the rest of the lineup to get place differential. So 1 assumed winner, 4 place differential plays if you go there in tournaments. You should consider stacking, especially when you're playing the assumption game, but also for other situations too. Pairing, Ryan Newman and Chris Buescher together with Roush Fenway Racing makes a lot of sense, even if we're not going with an assumed winner. That's a way you want to play things. And finally, you do want to leave salary on the table, not just because it gets you different lineups from the rest, but because based on the way this field is set up, that will be the optimal approach for Sunday's race. So that's how you want to play things. Now the question is, who fits that strategy? Let's go tier by tier here based on the salaries over at FanDuel.com. Starting off with the elite tier, that is Brad Keselowski at $14 through Denny Hamlin at $12,500. And everybody in this range is starting within the top 10 spots. So we can rank them effectively by order of preference, which is going to have me rank them Keselowski 1, Logano 2, Hamlin 3, and Blaney 4. All 4 of those guys are legit assumption lineup winners. And I want to make that clear. Like, although Blaney's 4th, you can use him as an assumed winner. The reason I like Keselowski is that he's starting 10th, so he has a tiny bit more place differential juice to squeeze. If he were to win the race, that would be 4.5 points for place differential. That's not negligible. That's something for sure. Keselowski almost won in Daytona. He got blocked by Logano on the last lap, resulted in a big wreck and a lot of sadness for my lineups. And I think when you combine the lower starting spot with the win equity, it's hard for me to turn down Keselowski. He's had a lot of wrecks recently, but at think he's a 5-time winner in Talladega. You know, when he needs to win, he can get the job done. So I am leaning Keselowski 1. But the way that I'll likely wind up playing this tier is having relatively equal exposure to most of the guys in this range. They are all between 6.9%, nice, and 12.7% in my win simulation. So there's not some big gap. And I'm not expecting any of them to fall through the cracks from a popularity perspective. So these guys will be the anchors of my assumption lineups, and I do think they are a tier above the rest of the field. So again, the ranks are Keselowski, Logano, Hamlin, and Blaney, but I want relatively equal levels of all four just because there's not a huge gap in them from a win simulation perspective, and they kind of do need a win to pay off. The second tier on FanDuel is Eric Almirola at $12,000 through Martin Truex Jr. at $10,000. And we get a bit of place differential juice here. Eric Almirola, Kurt Busch, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. all starting between 14th and 17th. Of that group, I will be highest on Almirola. The Fords in general have been really good in this package. Their bumpers align really well, so they can bump draft effectively. That's the biggest thing in Almirola's favor here, but he's also just a good pack racer. He nearly won Talladega last year. He got spun and almost won it backwards, which would have been cool. He did win in Talladega a couple years ago. He's won in Daytona, starting in 14th. And I think that is low enough where Almirola can pay off even if he does not win. He actually, I think, was in the perfect lineup last year after starting 15th or so. Regardless, he was in the perfect lineup for a race last year, starting in a similar range. And I think he can do it again. So you don't need to use Almirola as an assumed winner. You can justify him pretty much any build. You can stack him with a Penske car if you want to go with a Ford stack. So although Almirola not super far back, still someone I will use even in a lineup where I don't assume he wins the race. I'd put Stenhouse second here. He wrecks a lot. He's earned the nickname Wrecky, but he has a lot of upside to win this race. He also tends to be better in Talladega than Daytona. It's a wider track, probably better suited for his erratic driving style. 9 top 10s and 15 career races here. It's a surprisingly good rate for how high variance the track is. Stenhouse starting 17th. That works for me. Pretty similar to Almirola. I like those two quite a bit. I'm going to put Chase Elliott ahead of Kurt Busch, even though Busch is starting lower in the lineup. I just feel that Chase is a more realistic winner, and there's not a huge gap in them from the starting position perspective. And we know the Hendrick cars will have crazy speed at this track. They are always the fastest cars, like fast, on this track type, and that does still matter here. Chase won the race, the spring race in 2019. 3 other top 5s here in 10 career starts. So I'd rather have him than Busch. I'm going to rank this tier Almirola 1, Stenhouse 2. Those guys work in all builds, and I consider them for cash games as well. I would go Elliott 3, Kurt Busch 4, and Martin Truex Jr. 5 in this second tier. The mid-range on FanDuel is Kyle Busch at $9,700, Austin Dillon at $8,200, and we have a couple of drivers starting inside our target range in this tier, between 20th and 29th. We'll talk about them in a second. But first, I want to talk about Kyle Busch. He's starting in 9th, which means he's not going to get us place differential. He's $9,700, not some huge value play. That likely means that Busch needs a win to pay off, but I don't think that's unreasonable. He is at 7.6% to win in my simulations. I think he's a better bet than he is a DFS play, but I will use him in DFS too. He's a good pack racer, just hasn't had great luck recently. And that could swing back here very easily. I'm not going to go too hard at Busch due to the starting spot, but I want to actively make sure I have Kyle Busch as an assumed winner because I think he can get the job done. So Kyle Busch, someone to make sure you're not glossing over while you're stacking the back for this week. The two guys turning deeper here are Tyler Reddick and Ryan Newman. Reddick is 20th, Newman 28th. Reddick was 7th in Talladega last year. Really good on these tracks in the Xfinity Series. He had 1 win apiece in Daytona and Talladega there. Also got a win in Daytona in the Truck Series. So Reddick firmly on our radar. Newman had that scary crash in Daytona, but didn't really back down last year. He actually finished 6th in the second Talladega race, which really surprised me. I'd kind of backed off of Newman at the pack tracks, thinking that maybe he would be tepid. Maybe be pedaling back a bit, given the crash in Daytona. Didn't happen in that second Talladega race. So, I find that interesting. And I think he's definitely worth considering. The other guy to consider for cash games in this range, I don't think he's someone I'm going to get to, but you could consider Kevin Harvick for cash. I think he's a very good tournament play. Not as high on him for cash. Really rough 2021 for Harvick. The one exception was Daytona. They finished 4th there. He had a 6th place average running position, led a good number of laps. And the Stewart-Haas racing cars often hang in the back. That can be frustrating if you're following lineups live during a race, but it does make them more likely to finish the race. So I think Harvick is a cash game consideration, but not a lock. This tier, I will rank Harvick 1. I'll go Newman 2, Reddick 3, Kyle Busch 4, Austin Dillon 5, Alex Bowman 6, and Christopher Bell 7th. It's a pretty good tier. Between Harvick, Newman, and Reddick, you've got guys who can get you place differential, can be in non-assumption lineups, and I think that's valuable for sure. The value tier on FanDuel is Ryan Preece at $8,000 through Bubba Wallace at $6,500. This is where most of our core should come from. My favorite guy in this range is Chris Buescher. He's starting 21st, which is higher than some of the guys in this range, but I think he can win this race. I actually don't mind betting him outright at 50-1. He led 15 laps in the second Talladega race last year. He might have won the first race had he not gotten squeezed in the final stretch. And we've seen Buescher traditionally be better at Daytona, but ever since he moved to Roush Fenway Racing, he's picked things up quite a bit at Talladega, which tells me that his equipment is likely better now than it was then, because equipment matters more in Talladega than it does in Daytona. Buescher ranks 13th in my model straight up. That is the highest by a wide margin of any driver starting in the back half of the field. So I'm going to rank Buescher number 1 in this tier. The second highest ranking driver for someone starting outside the top 20 is Bubba Wallace. He's starting back in 24th, ranked 18th in my model. And he's ranked there because he's really good on these tracks. He had average rank positions of 15th and 13th last year in Talladega while in pretty bad equipment. Now he's effectively teammates with the Joe Gibbs racing cars who will be at the front. I think that like in the lineups where you go with Hamlin or Kyle Busch as your assumed winner, Wallace should be in a good chunk of those lineups. And Wallace, like Buescher, is a cash game play for me, for sure. I think he's a great option there. The other guys starting deeper here are Ryan Preece, Cole Custer, and Eric Jones. Preece is my favorite guy in this range. Starting back in 29th, he finished 3rd in Talladega as a rookie back in 2019. He was 10th here last year, 6th in Daytona this year. Preece is another cash game consideration. I would go Custer next, and he stacks really well with Almirola and Harvick. Jones would be after that. He's a good driver on these tracks. He's won in Daytona a couple times if you include the Busch Clash, although that was kind of fluky. I just worry about the equipment because it does matter a lot here. And his equipment is not as good. Not a lot. It matters more than it does in Daytona. And his equipment is not as good as the other guys here. So like the talent, don't like the car. I'll put him lower, but I'll still use him. Overall, though, this is a loaded tier. I would consider both of these guys for cash games. And I might just honestly use all of them. I would rank it Buescher first, Wallace second, Preece third, Custer and Jones. I will have some Matt DiBenedetto starting 13th. Especially when I go with a Penske driver as my assumed winner. I think that he fits well there. Starting deep enough where I can like him, but not make him a core play. The punting tier on FanDuel is Chase Briscoe at $6,000 on down. One guy down here, starting super deep, who I like a lot, is Kaz Grala. He is starting back in 38th. And when you look at his salary, look at his betting odds, he looks like he's driving dud equipment, but he's not. He's driving for Colleague Racing, and they are a very competitive team in the Xfinity Series. They've got money. They've run 3 races in the Cup Series, and they actually have a top 10. AJ Allmendinger got a top 10 at Daytona in the road course. Justin Haley was 13th with them back in the 2020 Daytona 500, and Grala was running really well before he had issues here back in the spring, like 16th or so. Starting 38th here, $5,000. We've seen Grala finish well in the Cup Series. Got a top 10 at the Daytona road course last year, filling in for Austin Dillon. I'm willing to go at Grala in cash games. I might not wind up using him over the guys in the tier above this. And I don't need the salary savings, but I really do think he's a hyper worthwhile play starting in 38th. Grala is... I might go there for cash games. That's where I'm at. Despite the fact that he's not in as good of equipment as guys like Wallace and Buescher, I might get there in cash games still. Ross Chastain isn't starting super far back, but I'm going to have him in my player pool. He was 7th in Daytona last year. He was 12th in Talladega in 2019 in terrible equipment. This is the best equipment that Chastain has had, and he was competitive here before that. So I'll take that, even starting 18th. I think that he is pretty undersalaried. So I do like Chastain. My win sims have him at 1.6%. That is higher than everybody else with a salary of $6,500 or lower. Other guys at least consider down here are Justin Haley in 34th and Anthony Alfredo in 30th. Haley good on this track type. One in Daytona, it was fluky, obviously, but he can get around. Inspire is a tier above the other back marker cars. That's why Corey LaJoie's in play too. He's also in this range starting in 26th. Really good track record on this track type. So Haley and LaJoie are in play for me. I would just rather go guys like Gralla specifically, I think, when I'm down here for sure. Finishing up with my picks to win for this week, we will just go straight based on the simulations. One driver above $10,000 and one driver below it. Joey Logano is the favorite in my simulations, 12.7% win odds based on those. So I think that Logano does make a lot of sense. If we're going with a guy below $10,000, it's actually a guy ranked 4th in my win simulations. That's Kyle Busch. He's at 7.6% to win the Sims, $9,700 on FanDuel for this week. So I say you just do it. Go with Logano. Go with Kyle Busch. I actually do like betting either of them. I think that actually Brad Keselowski has a tiny bit of value on him as well. Probably going Keselowski over Logano for betting, but for this, we're just picking a winner. Based on the salary tier, we'll go Logano and Kyle Busch for this week. That is all that we have for this week's Heat Check, previewing the Talladega GEICO 500. Should be a lot of fun on Sunday again. Make sure you stick to the strategy, stick to the process of loading up on place differential guys, even when it does leave you well below the salary cap. That is a necessity if you want to win a lot of money for this weekend. If you have additional questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Make sure if you're playing UFC DFS, check out Austin Swain's preview of UFC 261, already posted. Also NBA, NHL, and MLB podcast posted in the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your DFS lineups for the GEICO 500. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.